Hello, my special friends. We're about to go on a journey together. A journey to a wonderful world of sound, colors, and feelings. A world as beautiful as only we can imagine. So let's cuddle up and get comfortable. Relax and close our eyes and journey to the magical world of a Dreamables story. 8-year-old Darryl had his very own treasure chest. It had been given to him by his grandfather, and it was stored up in the attic. The chest was big and dusty, and it was driving Darryl absolutely crazy because he couldn't get it open. It was a huge chest, so huge and heavy, Darryl couldn't move it, not an inch, not even if he put his back to it and pushed on it as hard as he could. His feet just slipped on the wood floorboards. The color of the chest was brown, but you could hardly see that because it was covered almost completely by dozens and dozens of stickers. Stickers that showed pictures of exotic and far-off places. One showed a huge steel tower shaped like an upside-down Y. Another showed a mountain with faces carved in its side. Others showed pictures of colorful parrots, flowers, and landscapes. It was almost midsummer. School had been out for over a month, and Darryl was very bored. He found himself going up to the attic more and more and staring at the wonderful pictures on the chest. His gaze would go to the wide leather straps that held the chest shut, then to its brass snaps, tarnished and old, and finally to the strange combination lock on the front that held the chest closed tight. There was a tag wired to the lock, but the words on the tag were from some other language, and Darryl couldn't read them. More than once, Darryl had gone to his father to ask when he could open the chest. His father just looked at him, smiled, and said, "Soon." Darryl's hopes were dashed. He knew that when his father said soon, it meant maybe forever. He asked his father what was inside, and his father said that it was a treasure chest, and so naturally treasure was inside. Darryl's heart did a somersault in his chest. "Can I just look inside?" he asked. Then his father said, "You may open it when you can open it." And that was all he would say. So Darryl stood in the attic, surrounded by boxes, old clothes, a few stray holiday decorations, and his very own treasure chest that he couldn't get open. Deep down, he knew that if he said or did the right thing, he'd get to open it, and all the treasure would be his. "Open sesame," he said, but nothing happened. "Open sesame," he said in a deeper voice, but that didn't work either. Darryl slumped down onto the floor, his back against the chest, and put on his thinking cap. The chest had been his grandfather's. He knew that. His grandfather had been an explorer and an adventurer. Darryl thought that those were wonderful things to be. You got to go all around the world, even to places that no one had ever seen before. What was that? Darryl thought he had heard a sound, and it seemed like it came from inside the chest. He put his head close, pressed his ear against it, and then jumped back. He couldn't believe it. The chest was magical. He had to get it open. Those voices and strange sounds were coming from inside the treasure chest. Then it struck him. The voice had been in another language. The tag on the lock was in another language. He had to find out what was written on the tag. It was so easy. Why hadn't he thought of it before? He had to look up the words. Darryl ran downstairs, found a piece of paper and a pencil, and ran back up to the attic to the chest. He carefully copied every word, being careful to get each letter right. Then he folded the paper, tucked it in his pocket, and ran all the way to the library. The library was huge and quiet. At first, Darryl was completely lost. He had no idea where to go. Then he saw a large sign that said, "Information." That was what he needed. So he headed across the big empty floor toward it. An old lady sat beneath the sign, a very old lady. Darrell thought that maybe she was as old as his grandfather. She raised her head and pulled off her glasses to look at him. "Yes," was all she said to him. "I need to know what this says," Darrell said to her, and handed her his paper. The lady put her glasses back onto her nose, frowned at the paper, and then told him that he needed a special dictionary. Darrell was so excited. The old lady then found him a table and sat him down, and quickly returned with a large, heavy book. She smiled when she gave it to him, a twinkle in her eye, and then left him there. Darrell struggled for hours with the dictionary, but he knew his alphabet and eventually was able to look up the first words of the tag. A thrill shot through him when he found out that the first words meant to open. He knew he was on the right track. Once he got the hang of it, the rest of the note went rather quickly. It said, "To open, the owner of this chest must dial in the day, month, and year of his birthday." Darrell gave a yell and was promptly shushed because, as everyone knows, you shouldn't be loud in a library. Then he jumped up from his chair and ran all the way home. He was breathing hard when he got up to the attic. The chest was still there, sitting just the way it always had. Darrell stepped up to it. He looked closely at the dials on the brass lock. One by one, he thumbed them until they showed the date of his birth. As the final number came into view, with a loud click, the lock snapped open just like that. There was a sucking sound, and then a brief flash seemed to come from inside. But that couldn't be, could it? Darrell hesitated, trying to make sure this was the right thing to do. His father had given him permission, hadn't he? You may open it when you can open it. That was what he had said. But what if there was something dangerous inside? Like an Egyptian mummy coming unwrapped, just waiting to reach an arm out and pull him in. Oh, maybe his dad should be here when he lifted the lid. That would be the best thing to do. That would be the safest. His father would be home in a few hours. He could wait that long. Darrell sat there, looking at the chest and imagining the treasures inside. There would be Spanish doubloons, of course, just like in the book Treasure Island, the one that his father read to him late at night. And gold and silver and jewels, hundreds of sparkling jewels in every color. Maybe a treasure map or two, even a jeweled crown. Who knew what might be inside? Magic potions to turn him invisible. A bottle that he would rub to make a genie appear. All sorts of things. The waiting was torture, pure torture. The seconds dragged by. Finally, Darrell couldn't stand it. He jumped up, went to the chest, got both hands down beneath the lid. He pushed with all his might. Slowly, the lid creaked up. Slowly. And then it fell over backwards on its hinges with a crash, dust flying everywhere, getting in his eyes. It smelled like his grandfather's house, old but very warm. Darrell wiped his eyes, blinked, and looked down inside, and his heart fell. He was so disappointed. His shoulders drooped. He couldn't believe it. He felt cheated. Books. Books upon books. The chest was full of books, old, dusty books. Big ones, little ones, red ones, blue ones. All of them old-fashioned, with leather or brass clasps holding them shut. What a gyp! An absolute gyp! It wasn't fair. It was worse than getting underwear and clothes for gifts. Darryl reached in, moved some of the books aside, but beneath the books were more books. That was why the chest was so heavy. Books, books, more books. He slumped down on the chest. This was no treasure. There were supposed to be diamonds and rubies from Africa, a pirate spyglass, neat stuff that he could show off to his friends. Instead, there were books. Darryl didn't even like books. He didn't like to read. It was too hard. The only books he liked were the ones that his father read to him at night, or ones with lots of pictures. He looked into the chest. No, those weren't the kind of books that had pictures in them. Those were the kind that were full of words. But wait a second. What about the sounds he had heard? The voices. Darryl leaned into the trunk, almost falling in, and started pulling out books, thinking maybe there was a secret compartment. The books dropped down onto the floor of the attic with a thud. Then a strange thing happened. Suddenly, a gruff voice came from behind him.
It'll please you to take a bit more care with the tomes, my lad, if you don't mind."
Darryl turned, and before him was the most amazing sight he'd ever seen in his life. There on the floor of the attic, one of the books had fallen open. Standing on the book's pages was a tiny man, red with anger, shaking a fist at Darryl.
"Criminy,"
the tiny man said.
"You wouldn't know a treasure if one was to bite you in the leg."
With that, the tiny man climbed right down into the book and disappeared. Then an arm reached out and grabbed the book's cover and pulled it shut. It closed with a snap. Darryl stared at the book. He went on staring at it for the longest time. It took a lot of courage to go over there and pick it up. More courage even than it took to open the chest itself. But finally he did. He reached down and picked up the book, and it acted just like a normal book. He opened it. There was a neat map at the front of it, but no pictures. He came to page 1 and started to read. Darryl didn't notice it, but when he opened the book, the late afternoon sun got a little brighter. And he didn't notice the sound of the birds, or the smell of the ocean, or the breeze coming through the window. As he read, occasionally he came to a word he didn't know. One of the other books was a dictionary, though, so it was easy to look the words up. It was sort of fun, in a way, especially when he started to get into the story. It was about a prince, a dwarf, and a beautiful girl elf. They were traveling towards a range of purple mountains in search of an ogre that had stolen the prince's treasure. Darryl didn't notice the sun as it came out overhead, filtering down through the leaves of the tree he now had his back to. The grass was soft beneath him. The sky was very blue, the clouds very fluffy and white, and the breeze soft and gentle.
Darryl, you made it. Good news all, there he is."
A clear voice rang out. Darryl looked up from the book, and that was when he realized that everything around him had changed. He was now actually in the story he was reading. He stood up, turned, and there, standing in front of him, were 3 very strange people. Darryl recognized the tiny man, the dwarf that he had seen coming out of the book. The dwarf just grunted, strode to the crest of the hill, pulled out a small telescope, and scanned the horizon. With the dwarf was a young knight, a prince Darryl knew from reading the story. He had a sword at his side. Next to him was the beautiful girl elf, dressed in soft fabrics of green and yellow. "I don't believe it. I'm actually in the story," Darryl said. The prince nodded. "Of course you are, and we're glad you're here. We need your help." The girl elf held out a map to Darryl, the same map that was in the first few pages of the book. "Can you read this?" she asked. It was all happening so fast. He looked at the map, then looked out at the horizon. He saw the majestic purple mountains in the distance, dark clouds gathering above them. He wanted more than anything to go there. The prince reminded him of the huge treasure they would find: gold and silver, jewelry, ancient swords. And magic bottles and treasure maps? Darrell asked. 1,000 of them, the prince said. Darrell looked at the mountains in the distance and said, "Yes, I can read the map." The knight and the girl elf smiled. But just then, Darrell heard something. It sounded like somebody was calling his name. He turned, but there was nobody around. It sounded like his father's voice calling him. "You'll be going, I guess," said the prince. "We'll camp here for the night." He looked Darrell in the eye. "Come back to the story when you can." Darrell heard his name called again. Suddenly, Darrell was wakened in the attic by his father shaking him by the shoulder, calling his name. He realized he must have fallen asleep while reading. His father told him to come down to eat, that he could finish the story later. He started to tell his father what happened. His father smiled at him and said, "These books are special. My grandfather got them from his father. They came here across the ocean by an ancient ship from out of the old world. By reading them, you can journey to magical places. You can go almost anywhere." Darrell looked at the pile of books, then suddenly understood. "These books," he said, "from Grandpa, these stories, you've read them all, haven't you?" His father nodded, "Yes. They were yours before you gave them to me, right?" His father nodded again. "You can read them any time, now that I know you'll look up the words you don't know," said his father. He stood up and went to the attic stairs. "Hurry along now," he said, and disappeared down the stairs. Darrell put the book he'd been reading back into its place in the chest, carefully, as if it were gold. "Wait for me," he said softly. "I'll be back, and we'll find the way to the Purple Mountains." Darrell thought that if he ate fast and skipped dessert, he could be back with his new friends very quickly. After all, he thought, the prince needed him to read that map. Before he went downstairs, Darrell took a long look at the treasure chest filled with books. He wondered if he could share his books with his friends so they could all journey to many magical lands. All of a sudden, a voice came from out of his treasure chest saying, "Wonder no more, my friend. Books are for everyone to read and enjoy. There is no better way to learn about wonderful magical places than to read books. So tell your friends, and let's journey together to magical lands and visit new friends through the wonders and beauty of books."